Good evening. It is Wednesday, October the 12th, about 10 after 7. This is Shay Gibson with Wind Alert, bringing you a Chucktown Wind Report plus Tropics update. We're going to look at Hurricane Nicole heading towards Bermuda. It could be a major 3 hurricane. So first, let's take a look at our area. Right now, what we have is winds from the east-northeast 10 to 13 miles per hour at the Isle of Palms Pier. Offshore at the Capers nearshore buoys 16 to 20, where the gradient's a little bit stronger. We saw Folly Beach today. Right now it's 11 to 14. We did see the winds climb, though. We saw the winds really come up pretty high around 2:30, 3 o'clock p.m., almost gusting towards 30 miles per hour. In fact, in our archives, we see 24 miles per hour at 2:51 and 29 miles per hour at 2:56. So the winds really came up along the gradient on that east-northeast sea breezing and some of that mid-level troughing, helping to increase the local gradient. In fact, here's Isle of Palms that came up as well. And the winds were 23 miles per hour at 2:55 p.m. and highest wind gusts at 26 miles per hour at 2:35 p.m. So we saw some sustained winds there for a little while in the low 20s, and then it sort of fell off, and that's due to the air temperature falling and the land starting to cool. Everything's starting to kind of cool down as the day goes on past the peak heating period of the day, and that's why the winds only came up for a little while and then started back down. Because of that cooling mechanism throughout the day. So usually when the east-northeast sea breezes come in, sometimes we see it come a little bit earlier and then really peak out during the peak heating of the day and then start to fall off, and that's generally what happens. So here's the surface map for the area. Let's take a look at what's going on, what's driving that. We have a ridge built up and down the eastern seaboard, and that's what's been keeping this north to northeast winds the last couple of days. Today we saw that east-northeast lean into the coast with this mid-level troughing offshore, creating a gradient right along the coastline. So this east-northeast sea breezing really kind of cut on today for pretty much central South Carolina down to northern Georgia, and the gradient was allowed to increase to a point to see those winds come up to about 19 to 20 knots with higher gusts. Okay, beyond this day, for tomorrow, beyond today into tomorrow, we see this high moving out into the Atlantic, and basically this front's going to be driving down into the southeast region. What happens is it's moving into a cooler, drier air mass out ahead of it, and it's going to fizzle out. So there's not going to be very much of a connection to the Gulf of Mexico to drive any moisture up along it, and it's going to dry out and come through as a dry front. And then behind this, another area of high pressure is going to set up to the northeast and drive another northeast wedge down the coastline. So we expect for tomorrow that the winds will be light from the north, maybe modest, around 10 to 12 knots, and then falling throughout the day. And then as the front moves through Friday morning, this high pressure sets back up across the coast and brings down a northeast wedge. We're looking at 13 to 17 knots on Friday from the east. From the northeast and maybe east-northeast could bring those numbers up a little bit more, but Saturday looks a little bit more promising to see the higher numbers at 14 to 18 knots, possibly 15 to 19 as time goes on. So let's take a look at the model forecasting, and here's the GFS showing this ridge up and down the seaboard driving down those northeast winds. And then as time goes on, we see that front dropping down and then drying out and fizzling away. We call this frontalysis when a front dies in an area. There's just nothing to support it there. There's no connection to the Gulf, no warm air mass associated with it, and it just sort of dies off here. And then we have this high pressure moving across to the east and driving another northeast wedge down the coastline. And we do expect that to arrive sometime Friday. In fact, here we go for Friday morning at 8 a.m. We see the northeast winds already arriving, and we should see those winds bend out throughout the day towards the northeast and possibly get that east-northeast sea breezing. And then that sets up pretty much through Saturday. So we're expecting the winds to steadily come up through Saturday and then fall off by Sunday. That's a little bit too far out to tell as far as Sunday goes. So sea surface temperatures, we've dropped substantially over the last 8 to 10 days. We were about 81 to 82 degrees, and that was pre-Matthew. We had a northeast wedge set up where the winds drove the water temperatures down a few degrees to about 77 or so. Then Matthew came through, caused more cool water upwelling, and then we had northerly winds behind that. So what we have is a greatly diminished sea surface temperatures down to about 72 degrees over a small period of time. You can see here that even the Gulf Stream took a bite with Matthew going through it and stirring up the cool water underneath the surface layer. So it may take the Gulf Stream time to recover from that to get back up to about 84, 85 degrees. It doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon, which is good for us because any tropical systems or cyclones that develop or come towards our area are going to meet this cooler water and ultimately to its demise, hopefully. So we're not expecting anything. There's nothing on the radar for the next few days. We are watching Nicole, but that's not going to be a threat to land. Let's finish this forecast first, and we'll talk about that. Here's our air temperature readout for the next few days. We see pretty comfortable upper 70s through tomorrow, and even into Friday we see mid 70s, and then drop off Saturday, and that's with that arrival of the next area of high pressure to the northeast, driving down the northeast wedge again. We see the low temperatures fall pretty far down into the 50s and near 60. So our cool air looks like it's here to stay. We see a little bit of a rise up into the low 80s as we get into next week. It could be from Bermuda high pressure building in behind Nicole, and then pulling up a southerly flow. But with our water temperatures being so far down, we may look at our first marine layering event along the beaches where those warm southerly winds just can't build along the beaches. We see the higher numbers just inside the harbor mouth and inland. So as far as tide goes for this week, we are entering into king tide phase, which means that the tides will continue to come up further and further. We're heading towards perigean full moon, which means the closest of the moon to the earth, and then we get king tides coupled with that, and we're looking at a steady climbing tide throughout the week. The king tide period is between October 15th and October 20th. So we see here as we go towards the 15th that the tide is reaching just over 8 feet, so that's going to cause a lot of shallow coastal flooding. And with our beaches already damaged from Matthew, that could mean some more dune erosion and any houses that are on the water. Really need to be watching this because the tides are going to be coming up, so we're going to be seeing a lot of shallow saltwater flooding in the area steadily through the days until at least we get past the 20th when the tide starts to come down. We can even see our low tide. The black dotted line is the prediction line for the tides, and we even see that each low tide is well over a foot. So if that gives you any perspective, we're going from already a foot or so over its predicted chart, which is the blue line, keeps it down at 0 or mean low water level, and then it goes all the way up to just past 8 feet on Saturday early morning. So we have to keep an eye on the tides. Keep that in mind for anybody that's going downtown or any areas during the high tides. Keep this in mind for your safety concerns, because there would be some flooding involved with this over the next several days. In fact, the National Weather Service is on guard for it and has advisories out, so I suggest checking with their office for the National Weather Service Charleston for the latest information on that. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump to our tropics update. That's going to do it for the Chucktown wind report, and we're looking at Hurricane Nicole. And the 5 p.m. update from the National Hurricane Center had this at a Category 2 with winds of 110 miles per hour. I'm going to go ahead and refresh to see if they've updated it. They're going to be coming out with a new update pretty soon, probably the 8 p.m. update. And we could be looking at a Category 3 hurricane heading towards Bermuda. So the pressure is at 962 millibars moving to the north at 10 miles per hour. Here's the track for the system. And you can see here in the red, here's Bermuda right in the track of this thing, right in the middle. In fact, for the next update, they have a forecast or a prediction that we could be seeing a major hurricane by the time the 8 p.m. update rolls around. And Bermuda does not look good. It looks like a very serious situation developing for them with high winds, heavy rains, potential flooding, and an overall bad scenario unfolding for them. At this time of the year, it's very odd to see a hurricane of this strength at this latitude heading towards them. So keep them in your thoughts. Let's look at the rainbow imagery for the area. We can see the system down here with a well-developed eye. Here's Bermuda right here. You can barely see it underneath the outflow of the system. It looks like they're already being affected with some winds and possible rains up through that area. Here's the visible floater imagery, and we can see almost a very well-defined eye going on right now. As we head into the night, it switches over to infrared imagery, so it looks better. But as we look in the inner eye wall, we see that there's a little bit of clutter around the inner eye wall, and the outer eye wall looks pretty strong, but it could be going through a couple of restructuring phases. But the outflow for the system is impressive. It's very symmetrical. Symmetrical outflow aloft means high pressure loft is directly over the exhaust for the system as well. The system is well contained. It has its own heat engine going, so it's just building off of its own heat energy as it heads to the north, and eventually it's just going to curve to the northeast and head right over Bermuda. So not looking good for them. Here's the rainbow imagery for this system, and we can see how the inner eye wall is trying to round off. Usually a healthy sign is when you have a solid inner eye wall with a very round, very well pronounced eye, and then you have the outer eye wall, which is deep in convection wrapping all the way around it. So we see a couple of areas along I'd say the northeast and the eastern quadrant of the system where the outer eye wall hasn't quite strengthened all the way around that inner eye wall yet. So we may continue to see that wobble around, but not before becoming a possible major hurricane status first, and then possibly weakening as it heads towards Bermuda. Here's our wind alert storm track viewer showing this as a Category 3 by the next 8 p.m. update, and heading over Bermuda. We can take a quick look at the forecast for winds for that area, and we see with the GFS that the winds really come up by midday on Thursday. So this is all going to go downhill starting now and all the way through Thursday. And if they can get through the day Thursday, things will start to improve by Friday. But you can see the wind gust here, 64 to 92 miles per hour, and that's from the southeast, and then it switches up immediately from the west-northwest. Now, these numbers could change with any fluctuation or intensification of the system. So, this is not set in stone. 92 miles an hour may easily become 100 to 110 with any intensification of the storm, especially if the eye is going directly over. The inner eye wall will contain higher winds than this. So it looks like Thursday is going to be a long day for Bermuda. So keep them in your thoughts. We wish the best for them, and I just hope that it weakens into a Category 2 before it hits. But that's going to do it for the tropical update and the Chucktown wind report. So keep them in your thoughts. Keep an eye on this, and I'll be back probably tomorrow to do another update. Thanks for watching, and take care.